standing here at the grave of Justus Erich Walbaum, a famous German type designer who lived here in the city of Weimar 200 years ago. And in this video I'm going to tell you a little bit about his life and the style of his most famous typeface, Walbaum-Antiqua. Walbaum-Antiqua is a typeface in the so-called modern style developed in the 18th century. The most famous typefaces in that style are Dido and Bodoni, and that's why this style is also called Didone, a term which combines both names. Today, Walbaum-Antiqua is considered the most famous German typeface from that time, but it is certainly not as famous as the other two. And there is a specific reason for that, which is that Germany at that time wasn't really involved in the development of the Roman type style within the Latin script. Because here in Germany, books usually looked like this in the 18th century. Almost always set in black letter with a very traditional, decorated layout and often printed on rather cheap paper. The development of the Roman type style in Europe happened elsewhere, namely in countries such as Italy, France, the Netherlands or England. The letters we use today originated in the type developed in Italy in the 15th century, and these typefaces are usually categorized as humanist style. They were already designed for movable type, but they still resembled handwritten text. You just need a broad nib pen held at a certain angle to write such letters. From the 15th to the 18th century, this type style developed into the style we call modern, and it is characterized by a strong contrast between the vertical and horizontal strokes and a letter design that looks much more constructed than written. And these features give those modern typefaces this elegant appearance. An important step in this direction was the development of this typeface. By the end of the 17th century, the French king commissioned the development of a new exclusive typeface for the royal print shop. And this typeface was developed with mathematical precision, something that was a rather new approach to type design at that time. So they used grids and circles to construct the letters, which was especially challenging with the italic letters. And it actually took several decades until the typeface was finally finished. Even though it was an exclusive typeface, it had a strong impact on the work of other type founders in and outside of France. They took over this new concept and developed it even further. This style had fully blossomed by the end of the 18th century with the typographic work of Bodoni in Italy and the Dido family in France. And this new modern design was not only about a certain style of typefaces, but also about the page layout itself. All these decorations like floral patterns and symbols were being removed, and we see a much cleaner look where the type really stands out. To achieve a proper display of these new typefaces, it was also necessary to make some technical advancements. To display those fine lines, new paper was developed, and also the printing presses had to be improved. The materials of those presses were changed from wood to metal to achieve much more precise prints. At that time, France and especially Paris became a center of art, culture and science, and with the printed texts from France, typical French typography also spread across Europe. Printing in Germany remained unaffected for some time, but aristocrats and people with higher education in Germany were very familiar with those cultural developments in France. In fact, they even started to imitate French culture. So Germans in aristocratic circles spoke French among each other and dressed like people in Paris. And they read French texts and became familiar with the style and quality of this new typography. And over time, more and more German writers, publishers and printers became interested in publishing German text in this new style. But that was easier said than done. It was expensive because you needed better paper, which was hardly available and had to be imported from abroad. You needed new printing presses, and of course you needed new typefaces, which at that time weren't available in German print shops. You could buy these typefaces from France, for example, but it became more common just to copy them. There were no copyright laws in the 18th century, not within the countries, let alone across countries. So German type foundries simply started to advertise typefaces in the style of Didot in Germany. And the most successful type founder who did this was Prillwitz from the city of Jena. He started with this around 1790 and had a lot of customers who bought these new Roman typefaces. And here are two original prints in this typeface from the end of the 18th century. But the majority of German books were still printed in the traditional layouts with blackletter typefaces. Beside the technical and financial problems, there were other problems as well. One was legibility. Since the vast majority of books were published in blackletter, many Germans weren't that familiar with the Roman type style and avoided books printed in these typefaces. And since blackletter was understood as the German type style, there were also ideological debates around the choice of typefaces. So printing German texts in the so-called Latin letters was understood by a lot of people as a betrayal of the German culture. There were heated debates about this topic around 1800, and that went on until the middle of the 20th century, when Germany finally gave up blackletter as their standard type style. These were some information about the circumstances of the time, and now on to the life of Justus Erich Walbaum. He was born in 1786 in a small town near Goslar. He started his professional career by going to the city of Braunschweig to become a salesman. His apprenticeship was at a pastry shop, and because of that he would also have to make wooden molds for pastries. And he became quite good at that and later switched from woodwork to metal engraving. He quit his sales job and became quite successful with making things like these medals. And from there it was only a small step to type making, because designing typefaces at that time basically meant engraving a certain design into metal. He then took over a font foundry in the city of Goslar, and here you can see some of his original type specimen sheets and brochures. By the end of the 18th century, the rather small city of Weimar had become a cultural center of Germany. The new Duchess Anna Amalia attracted the greatest minds of the time, like the famous writers Goethe and Schiller. With them and many more around, Weimar also became a good place for publishing, and the most successful local publisher was Friedrich Justin Bertuch, who heard about the type foundry of Walbaum and invited him to move with his foundry to the city of Weimar. Walbaum opened his foundry here in Weimar. This is a type specimen sheet he made after moving to Weimar. It shows the typefaces which are well known until today: Walbaum-Fraktur and Walbaum-Antiqua. Since Walbaum-Antiqua is so well known today, people often assume that it was also widely used around 1800 when it was made. But that wasn't the case for two reasons. Number one, the majority of books were still printed in blackletter, so there was no strong demand for Walbaum's Roman typeface, even though his design was actually very good. And the few printers who used those Roman typefaces already had bought them from other type founders. So Walbaum simply came a little bit too late with his design. And secondly, there was also a political reason that had a strong impact. Napoleon Bonaparte was at war with Prussia, and a decisive battle happened just 20 kilometers away from the city of Weimar. So the people and businesses here in this area were directly affected by the war, including Walbaum and his print shop. And this war affected the typography in Germany. Since this new type design was understood as something coming from France, after the war Germans didn't want to have anything to do with it anymore. So they almost instantly stopped using these typefaces and went back to the traditional blackletter typefaces, at least for the texts in books and magazines. The foundry of Justus Erich Walbaum still remained quite successful for more than 30 years here in Weimar. When Walbaum was 60 years old, his son Theodor took over the foundry, but unfortunately he died before his father, so there was no successor and Walbaum was forced to sell the foundry. The new owner was the publishing house Brockhaus in the city of Leipzig. Over the course of the 19th century, this publishing house mainly used the Walbaum typefaces for their own books, and they didn't put much effort into selling them to others. As a result, by the end of the 19th century, the Walbaum typefaces had basically been forgotten. At least until the printer Jakob Hegner rediscovered the Walbaum typeface that was still in storage at that publishing house. And this is how the Walbaum typeface came back to light in the 20th century. In 1918, the type foundry Hermann Berthold AG bought the type department of that publishing house, and so one of the biggest European type foundries was now in possession of Walbaum-Antiqua. And they started to republish it, and this was the beginning of the huge success of this typeface. The quality of the design in combination with the market dominance of Berthold brought the success. The typeface was made available as foundry type, but also for the linotype, monotype and intertype typesetting machines. So it could be used really anywhere. In a technical sense, but also in a stylistic sense. It was a very good typeface for longer texts, with its low contrast, warm design, and at display sizes it had that elegance of the modern typefaces which printers and readers enjoyed. The typeface remained successful throughout the 20th century, and you can get the Berthold versions of it until today. But they were adopted from phototype, which were itself adopted from metal type. In my opinion, the best interpretation available today is Walbaum 2010 by Stormtype. It was specifically made for digital type. It has optical sizes, many open type features, and everything you expect from a modern design. I put a link to it in the video description if you want to check it out. And that's what I wanted to tell you about Walbaum and his typeface. I hope you enjoyed it, and if you did, feel free to subscribe to this channel.